Hello, Kate. Welcome to Tudor History in 10.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm going to dive straight in because, as
Yeah.
the viewers know, we don't have much time to talk. But you are the assistant curator at the wonderful Hever Castle, and I wanted to talk to you today about a very special project that you are deeply immersed in, and that's all to do with Anne Boleyn's Book of Hours. So I want to get straight in and ask you, how did you get involved with this?
Goodness. Okay. Yes. So I started working with both of our wonderful books of ours that we hold at Hever, which are both written in and signed by Anne Boleyn. I started to work with them, I think, at the start of January 2020, so right before the pandemic hit. And I'm still working with them. As you say, it's a long project, but I worked at Hever before my current position. I've worked there for about 8 years on and off. So I've been around these books in their glass cases for years growing up and always been fascinated by them. So when I was doing my master's degree and I had the opportunity to come back and work with them as a scholar, I just absolutely could not turn that down.
I bet because they're real jewels in the crown, aren't they? Largely because they have the inscription, they have Anne's writing in, and of course that's what we all know, and what every Anne Boleyn lover just loves seeing.
Yeah.
So, what was your aim with the research? What were you trying to find out?
Well, I honestly just wanted to give them a close study, which I think has always shocked me that they've never really received as individual kind of artifacts. They've always been noted in scholarship just amongst all of Anne's other books, and they've never really had their own attention. And so I wanted to just give them their due attention and close study. And I happened across more information and more discoveries really that I did not expect to find at all. So it was sort of a bit of a surprise as I was working with them.
Such a thrilling adventure, and I want you to tell us what you found.
Yes, so I found in Anne's printed book of hours, which is perhaps the less famous of the two that we have at Hever, but I found four new inscriptions within the book. So it was previously thought to only hold one inscription, which is Anne's rhyming couplet, "Remember me when you do pray, that hope doth lead from day to day." And I uncovered four new inscriptions which had been erased and really physically rubbed out. So I studied them under ultraviolet light, and I used Photoshop and all sorts of editing software and my paleography skills as well, and tried to uncover them, and I've managed to do that.
And you saw them, were there just some faded outline of writing which you managed to pick up by eyesight that had just been overlooked before?
Yes, yeah, they are just, they sort of appear to the naked eye as smudges almost at the bottom of the page. They kind of look like water damage, so I think you could easily mistake it for water damage. But again, this book has never received close, detailed attention. And so I was lucky enough to be the first person to do that. And so the first person to sort of look closer and see these inscriptions were there.
That's wonderful. So you found four inscriptions and
Mm.
you looked at them with the ultraviolet light. What did you see? What were those inscriptions saying?
So under the ultraviolet light, they really did come through, and I managed to uncover partial transcriptions for each of the four notes. But most importantly, I've uncovered the names of each of the inscriptions. So each author of a note signed their name, which has been really useful to kind of piece together the provenance and the path that the book took after Anne's ownership. And so the names that were listed there were John Gage, Philippa Gage, Elizabeth Shirley, and Mary West. So three females, three women, and John Gage, who was the husband of Philippa Gage. So they were all kind of prominent, fairly prominent country gentry families, all local to the Boleyns at Hever. They were all around from Kent. And I think what it shows is that these were the families who kept the book safe from destruction, really, after Anne's execution. So many of her items were destroyed and her image was destroyed. And so these families obviously kept the book safe for future generations and for us to be able to admire it and look at it and love it now.
And we'll talk a little bit maybe more about those people, but just
Mm.
before we move off there, was the actual writing was it making notes with regards to what was already on the page, or was it just like almost like a modern I was in type of
Yeah,
inscription?
Hilariously, a lot of them are sort of, I think, the early modern equivalent of "I was here." But it's, yeah, in slightly more formal language. Most of them are kind of requests for remembrance. So if you're looking upon the prayer that the page has, and they've signed underneath, it's perhaps "Remember me when you're reading this prayer," kind of similar to Anne's own inscription. One of them is dedicated, so the inscription by Elizabeth Shirley is dedicated to her niece Joanna. So it also gives a sense of how this book moved and how it was passed between many different families, many different hands, and the kind of kinetic energy of the book, which is really interesting.
It's fascinating. Do we have any idea how these people came to own this book, or any? Are we postulating anything around that?
Yeah, so I definitely have my theory, which is that so all these names that I mentioned, they're all connected themselves by kin. So they were all part of one extended family. And so the link between them and Anne Boleyn seems to me to be through a woman named Elizabeth Hill, who was the wife of Richard Hill, who was the sergeant of the King's Cellar while Anne was at court, and then later when she was queen as well. So I think there's anecdotal evidence as well that Anne and Richard Hill and Elizabeth Hill were acquainted. They played bowls together. So I think it's likely that Anne passed the book to Elizabeth Hill, who actually coincidentally grew up in Sundridge, so only 7 miles from Hever, from Anne's childhood home. And I think then Elizabeth Hill passed it on through her family, because the signed names are members of her family. So I think it was very much kept safe by them.
Yeah, so a treasured family heirloom of
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
maligned queen. It's just wonderful. But you said it looks like the inscriptions had been erased. Why do
Yeah.
you think that is?
So again, it's hard to date exactly when they were erased, but it's likely, I think, that it was a trend in the Victorian era, so probably the late 19th century, to erase manuscript inscriptions before they were sold. They called it cleaning your manuscripts. So before they were sold at auction, they were often cleaned of any inscriptions that weren't seen. I know it's literally so upsetting, but they were cleaned of any inscription that wasn't seen as sort of important. I think obviously Anne's name, at seeing the sign name Anne Boleyn, is, a selling point for the book, but the other inscriptions perhaps weren't deemed as important, and so they were erased before it was sold, which is so frustrating.
Ah, it's so frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah,
Victorians have so much to
they do.
account for. God,
They
what they
really
did to
do.
buildings and objects is just terrible.
It really
Now,
is.
there's some link, isn't there, in all of this with another Tudor queen? Perhaps you could tell us a
Mm.
little bit about that.
Yes, so I also, in my research, discovered that our printed Book of Hours, the same copy of this printing, because obviously they would have been printed in a batch, was once owned by Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and it's currently held in the Morgan Library in New York. And so it's a really intriguing connection between these two kind of rival queens, Henry's first two wives, as to why they both owned the same copy of the same prayer book. And I think it's likely that they probably used it together at court before Anne became queen. So it's a really, yeah, intriguing connection.
Oh, so maybe Catherine had divvied these out to her ladies in waiting at the time, or
Yeah, I think it's likely that maybe Henry himself bought them as a batch, as a gift for Catherine and her ladies. Obviously, Anne was one of those ladies, or Catherine bought them for herself and her women. But what's interesting about Anne's copy is that it's decorated to a much higher extent than Catherine's, so than the Queen of England herself. So it looks like Anne had some say in the decoration of her own book, and she was really reaching high at this point, as we know.
so she had it embellished. How
She had
wonderful.
it
That's
embellished, yeah.
amazing. Oh my goodness. Now, look, we only have 10 minutes, and as
Yes.
everybody can see, the clock is already against
Mm.
us and counting down. Now, I know you've got a fantastically exciting exhibition coming up at Hever, so please tell us about it in the last 40 seconds or so.
Yes, so we launch on the 4th of March of this year, and the exhibition is called Becoming Anne Connections, Culture, Court. And it's been co curated by myself and Dr. Owen Emerson and Alison Palmer. And it's all about Anne's early life, her childhood, her upbringing, her time at Hever and in the courts of Europe. And yeah, it's going to be running from March till November. So please do come and visit.
Absolutely, because of course, this is the 500th anniversary year, isn't it, of Anne's
Yes, it's
first recorded
500.
appearance.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why it's celebrating her arrival back in England in 1522, so 500 years ago.
Hey, that's wonderful. So book your tickets, folks. Make
Yes.
sure you get down there this summer. Whoa, we're out of time. That's it. It's over. Thank you so much.
That's my
Your
own
excitement, you're knocking things over. Thank you so much, Kate, for being with us today and sharing your research with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.